April 8th, 2026. Picture this incredibly crowded Suffolk County courtroom. A woman named Melissa Cann is standing at a podium.
Right, surrounded by her family.
Exactly. And she is just staring out at this absolute sea of camera lenses and reporters, and she's fulfilling a promise she made 19 years ago.
A promise to never, ever stop searching for justice for her sister, Maureen.
Yeah. And, we usually picture the end of a major trial focusing entirely on the defendant, just standing there before the judge. But the sources we are looking at today, they demand a completely different perspective.
They really do. I mean, it was a defining moment for this entire decades-long saga. And it requires us to rethink how we digest these true crime narratives.
Totally.
Because the legal system, by its very design, prioritizes the mechanics of crime, right?
Right.
And the biography of the offender. But the true gravity of the Gilgo Beach killings case doesn't lie in the psychology of the man who took these lives.
No, not at all.
The real weight of the sources we're synthesizing for you today is about the transition of these victims. From anonymous Jane Does back into fully realized mothers, sisters, and friends.
Which brings us to the core of today's deep dive. Welcome in, everyone. We have a massive stack of sources covering the historic resolution of this case, and we are setting a strict boundary for our analysis today.
A very necessary boundary.
Yes. Our mission is to restore the dignity of the 8 women whose names were finally read into the court record. We're going to look at the families who absolutely refuse to let them be forgotten.
And critically, we're going to break down the systemic failures that allowed them to be lost in the first place.
Right. What we won't be doing is diving into the killer's childhood or treating him like some dark, fascinating protagonist.
Which is an essential shift, honestly, because before we can even begin to understand the structural failures of the investigation, we have to look at who these women actually were in their daily lives.
Yeah.
Because for years, media coverage just slapped these incredibly one-dimensional labels on them, defining their entire existence by the fact that they were engaged in sex work at the time they disappeared.
And when you look at the mechanics of how media shapes public perception, I mean, a headline that reads "prostitute found" fundamentally alters the public psychology compared to a headline that reads "mother of 2 missing."
Oh, completely. It actively strips away their humanity.
It does. It allows society to just look the other way.
Yeah.
But the source material paints a much richer picture. Take Maureen Brainard Barnes.
Right.
She was 25 years old, a devoted mother of 2 from Connecticut. And she was tiny. Just 4'11".
Wow.
But carrying a massive amount of responsibility. I mean, she was facing eviction, staring down the loss of her mortgage. She stepped into high-risk work out of sheer economic desperation to protect her kids.
And then you have Amber Lynn Costello, who was 27. Her roommates in West Babylon described her as quirky and goofy and just profoundly generous.
Yeah, they said she was the type of person who would literally give you the shirt off her back.
Exactly. And she lived in a tight-knit household that really looked out for her. Her roommates even intervened at times to save her from aggressive clients. She existed within a real community of care.
She wasn't just out there completely alone. We also have Megan Waterman, a 22-year-old from Maine.
Right.
She was a young mother, and her entire daily routine was anchored by phone calls with her 3-year-old daughter. Her family described her as vulnerable, but possessing this heart that was loved by so many.
And then there's Karen Vergata. I mean, for 27 years, she was known to the public only as Fire Island Jane Doe.
Which is just heartbreaking.
It is. The contrast between that clinical Jane Doe label and Karen's actual life is staggering. She was 34, living in Manhattan.
And her family called her the baby guru, right?
Yes, because she was the person everyone in her circle went to for parenting advice. She was a fierce Virgo, a harsh critic of Italian food despite her Irish heritage.
I love that detail.
Me too. And she was a woman who loved the color pink floral patterns,
Yeah.
and she flat out refused to drink stale coffee.
Those specific, vibrant details make her so real. And we obviously can't forget Sandra Costilla, a 28-year-old immigrant from Trinidad and Tobago.
Right.
She was navigating New York City and raising a 5-year-old son. When you really look at these women, you see caregivers, friends, and mothers.
Absolutely.
I mean, to me, reducing their entire existence to their most desperate economic choice is like summarizing a complex, beautiful novel by only reading a single tragic footnote.
That is the perfect framework for this analysis,
Hmm.
because the media's reduction of these women into footnotes wasn't just insulting. It had a direct, catastrophic impact on the police investigation itself.
Yeah, it really leads us into the systemic choice to let them slip away. If you are listening to this and wondering how several vibrant, deeply loved women vanish without a massive, immediate public outcry.
You have to look at the institutional mindset of the 1990s and 2000s.
Exactly. There was this tragically common acronym used within certain law enforcement circles at the time, NHI.
NHI, which stood for No Humans Involved.
That's just sickening.
It's the ultimate dehumanizing classification. And it was used to classify cases where the victims were sex workers, drug users, or unhoused. It built a formal hierarchy of victimhood.
Yeah, early on in the Gilgo Beach investigation, officials like the then chief of detectives, Dominic Verone, publicly implied that citizens at large had nothing to fear.
Right, the explicit messaging was that the killer was selecting from a specific pool of sex workers.
The safety pool fallacy.
Yeah.
But you have to ask, is it just a profound lack of societal empathy, or is it active resource allocation?
It's a bit of both, honestly.
Because police departments tend to put money and manpower where wealthy, vocal taxpayers complain the loudest. By telling the general public, don't panic, he's only killing those women, your family is safe, the department effectively neutralized the public pressure.
The exact pressure that usually forces jurisdictions to solve serial cases quickly. That is the exact mechanism at play. If these had been college students from affluent neighborhoods, the whole region would have been locked down. The urgency was absent because of their economic vulnerability.
And we really must acknowledge that economic vulnerability as a systemic issue itself.
Yes, the lack of a robust social safety net. Things like affordable childcare, housing support, a living wage, that's the root cause that forced young mothers like Maureen into these highly dangerous situations.
But the sources show it wasn't just apathy or resource allocation. There was active, deliberate dysfunction.
Oh, big time.
If you want to understand how a local police chief manages to physically lock the FBI out of a multi-jurisdictional serial killer case for years, you have to look at the politics of Suffolk County at the time.
Former Police Chief James Burke.
Yes, he actively blocked federal behavioral analysts and resources from assisting.
He did. And the operational reality of how he managed that is disturbing because in law enforcement, local jurisdictions have authority over their cases. The FBI cannot simply take over a local homicide investigation unless they're invited in, or unless a specific federal crime, like kidnapping across state lines, is proven. Chief Burke used that jurisdictional boundary to build a wall around Suffolk County.
It's like a lead surgeon refusing to call in a specialist during a failing, complicated operation simply because he doesn't want anyone noticing he hasn't been washing his hands.
That's a great way to put it.
Because Chief Burke wasn't trying to protect his department's pride. He was trying to protect himself. He was under federal investigation for civil rights violations and corruption.
Right. He was eventually sent to federal prison for beating a handcuffed suspect and orchestrating a massive cover-up.
So he hated the federal government, he feared their scrutiny, so he kept the FBI away, which had a disastrous effect on finding these women.
It reveals a spectacular level of hubris, and it really forces us to reevaluate the myth of the mastermind serial killer.
Oh, for sure.
Predators are rarely brilliant tacticians. They simply exploit the cracks in our system. They operate where the light isn't shining. And while the system looked inward to protect its own corruption, the families of these women were left completely in the dark.
And while the police were looking away, the killer was looking outward, directly targeting the victims' families.
Yes.
The torment these survivors endured over the last 2 to 3 decades is almost beyond comprehension. Take Melissa Barthelemy. She vanished in 2009 at the age of 24. Afterward, her 15-year-old sister received a series of phone calls.
5 weeks of calls. The killer used Melissa's own cell phone to call her teenage sister.
Unbelievable.
He mocked her, used vulgar language, questioned her character, and eventually taunted the teenager that Melissa was dead. It was a calculated psychological assault on a grieving family.
And yet, despite that pure horror, the family didn't just break down. Melissa's mother tracked the geographical breadcrumbs of those calls, noting they were pinging cell towers in places like Manorville and Massapequa.
Which was incredible of them.
Yeah, that specific data became incredibly vital to the investigation later on. They fought back with the only tools they had.
We see that resilience over and over in the source material, because the perpetrator tried to erase these women completely. He physically fragmented them, dismembering victims like Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack,
Yeah.
and scattering the remains miles apart between Manorville and Gilgo Beach.
And Valerie Mack's story really highlights the collateral damage of a system that fails its most vulnerable. I mean, she had been in the foster care system. Because of her transient life, she was never officially reported missing.
Wow.
But she left behind a 6-year-old son, Benjamin Torres. She loved him enough to permanently tattoo his name on her ankle, but he had to grow up completely deprived of her care and guidance.
It's just devastating. And the physical fragmentation of Jessica and Valerie's remains serves as this stark metaphor for how the legal system fragmented their stories. By keeping these victims separated, unnamed, and disconnected for decades, the system delayed justice. It took a combination of relentless family advocacy and advancements in science, specifically genetic genealogy, to force the system to see these women as whole people again.
Right. And if you're following cold cases lately, you hear genetic genealogy thrown around like it's a magic wand, but the mechanism behind it is painstaking.
Extremely.
It's not a television show where you put DNA into a computer and it spits out a driver's license. Investigators take a highly degraded DNA sample, extract a partial profile, and upload it to public genealogy databases like GED Match.
They might find a third or fourth cousin.
Exactly. Then genealogists spend months building massive family trees backward, using 19th century census records and birth certificates just to find a common ancestor, and then trace the branches forward to the present day to identify someone like Valerie Mack.
It is incredibly laborious. But that science, paired with the unyielding push from the families, changed everything. The real catalyst for unearthing the victims was the disappearance of Shanann Gilbert in May 2010. While her specific cause of death remains disputed and uncharged in this particular plea agreement, it was her family's absolute demand that the police search for her that brought investigators into that specific stretch of marshland.
Right. If Shanann's family hadn't pushed so hard, the other victims might never have been found.
Ever.
And all of that pushing, all of those decades of waiting, finally culminated in that Suffolk County courtroom on April 8th, 2026. The perpetrator, Rex Heuermann, stood before the judge and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of second-degree murder.
He also admitted to the 8th murder, Karen Vergata, in 1996, though it was covered under the plea agreement rather than charged separately.
Okay.
But he just matter-of-factly admitted to the crimes. As he did, the gallery was packed with the victims' relatives, many weeping as they finally heard the truth stated clearly on the legal record. He will serve consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
But, you know, the focal point of that day wasn't the mechanics of his plea. It was the statements made by the families and their representatives. Gloria Allred spoke for several of the families, and her statement cut right to the core of the systemic failures we've been discussing.
She emphasized that these women were young mothers who lacked meaningful economic alternative. They did not want to be in dangerous situations. They felt forced into high-risk survival work to support their children.
Which brings us to an ongoing reality for you to consider. The aftermath of violence does not end with a gavel strike. The criminal case might be closed, but a whole new fight has emerged regarding the victim's legacy.
Right.
Because the true crime media machine moves incredibly fast, and justice for these families now involves fighting the entertainment industry.
Yeah, we are seeing a fierce pushback against the media spectacle. Valerie Mack's son, Benjamin Torres, recently filed a wrongful death lawsuit. And crucially, he is not just suing the perpetrator.
Who is he suing?
He is suing the perpetrator's ex-wife, Asa Ellerup, and his daughter.
Now, normally, you would think the son of Sam law would prevent anyone connected to a killer from getting rich off a tragedy.
Right, that's the law originating from New York in the 1970s, designed to stop criminals from cashing in on book deals or movie rights.
Exactly. Any money generated is supposed to go to the state's Office of Victim Services to compensate the victims' families. But there is a massive loophole here.
A huge one. The current law generally only applies to the convicted criminal themselves, not their spouses.
Wow.
The context for Benjamin Torres' lawsuit is that reports surfaced claiming the perpetrator's ex-wife was paid over $1 million by NBC and Peacock for her participation in a documentary.
$1 million. While the families of the victims are left to pick up the pieces of shattered lives.
Yeah.
You can completely understand why Benjamin's lawyer argued that this money was an exploitation of his mother's slaughter. It's prompted actual legislative action to close that loophole.
Yes. State Senator Kevin Thomas from Long Island is proposing an expansion of the Son of Sam law. The proposed bill would amend the law to explicitly cover contracts with the family or former spouses of the convicted.
Okay, so how does it work?
The mechanism is pretty simple. If a media company pays a spouse or family member more than $10,000 to talk about the crimes or their aftermath, the state would notify the victims' families, allowing them to press civil action to potentially recoup those earnings.
It makes total sense. As Senator Thomas pointed out, it is grotesque for a network to ink a $1 million deal with a suspect's spouse before the ink is even dry on the legal proceedings, while the victims' families are left with nothing but grief.
Absolutely. The families are demanding that the narrative belong to the victims, not the media, the police, or the fascination with the killer.
Right.
It is a reclamation of history.
Yeah.
And if we look at the true legacy of the Gilgo Beach case, it isn't the genetic genealogy breakthroughs or the guilty plea. The true legacy is how it forced a broken, apathetic system to finally acknowledge the humanity of the marginalized. It proved that no matter how hard society tries to ignore or discard certain people, their lives matter.
Melissa Cann, standing at that podium on April 8th, delivered a eulogy for her sister Maureen that I just want to read, because it summarizes exactly what this long fight has been about.
Go ahead.
She said, "Your voice was never silenced, your story never forgotten, and your life will always be more than the tragedy that took you."
That is just beautiful.
It really is. You know, this case spanned 30 years, 3 decades, and it was allowed to happen because institutions labeled these women as less than. So, as you go about your work, look around your own community. Who is currently falling through the cracks of our social safety net? Who is being deemed invisible today? And how can we change the narrative so that it doesn't take another 30 years and another tragedy for us to finally see them?